Well, as we're getting settled with the tech here, I am Kaci Pellar. I use she, they pronouns. I am the policy manager at an organization called Detroit Disability Power, which I'll talk about shortly. Up on the screen here, you'll see our slides, which have a lovely picture on the right side here of many of our members gathered at one of our earliest events as an organization, holding up some colorful signs with a beautiful mural in the background. And today's topic is economic justice, is disability justice. And the reason why there's an equal sign there is I like to think in math equations sometimes because it goes both directions. Disability justice is economic justice is disability justice. When you're doing justice right, you're catching both categories, so to speak. So as I said, I'm Kaci. Quick visual description. For those in the space who may have that access need, I am a late 20s white femme presenting person with long dark curly hair. Today I'm wearing a long black dress with a gray cardigan. And before we get too far into the presentation, we'll do a quick accessibility check and make sure everyone has what they need to participate and engage for the next hour or so today. I smell all the great food. I see y'all's faces like we're in the post-lunch slump a little bit. So like if you need to, like shake it out, do whatever you need to. Or if you're like, no, I need to let my food settle. My face might reflect that I'm a little sleepy, but I'm here, I'm engaged. Do what you need to be comfortable for this time. To kind of zoom back out a little bit for this access check, we like to talk about modeling. So this is something that all of you can do if it's your first time seeing it. Great. If it's not, even better. This is something that you all can practice in your spaces, whether virtual or in person or even hybrid. So as a presenter, it's my job to identify how to raise concerns, which in this space, y'all can just raise your hand, give me a little wave. I would say probably the biggest thing is I'm nervous, so I might talk quickly at times. So if you can just give me a little hand signal to slow down if I need to. And we will stop if necessary, if one of our access stops. If you're online, a couple virtual tips, turning on the captions, make sure you're pinning your interpreter if you have interpretation services offered, and then negotiating kind of how you'll use the chat throughout your meeting, as some people use screen readers. And so there's kind of two audio lines coming through. As a participant, I'll ask that you all, if we later on when we have kind of more discussion-based side of the presenting, I'll ask that you state your name before you start speaking. The first time I'm meeting many of you, so it'll help me remember, but also just all of us will know who is talking. Provide a quick visual description, speak as clearly as possible, and if you're online, staying muted so that there's less sensory information for participants. So that was kind of a long-winded version of the access check, but in general, if y'all can give me a thumbs up if your access needs are met, or if they are not, just raise your hand and we can talk about it for a sec.
Yeah, my needs are met, but I just wanted to add to that, and thank you so much for this, Kaci, just to use the microphone so that, because we do have someone online, making sure that we all can hear.
Thank you. And also if I talk too far away from the mic or anything like that, let me know. All right, y'all. Where's the computer I'm pointing to?
Oh. All right, go ahead.
There we go. Okay. So I mentioned I am the policy manager with this organization called Detroit Disability Power. I have been there for about 5 years now, which is amazing, but also surreal. We were started in 2018, but DDP, or Detroit Disability Power, is a disability justice organization that is working to dismantle systems of oppression and build political power in the disability community. We have about 312-ish members, I believe, and we were formed in 2018, as I said, to make Detroit the most accessible city in America. We do also work across the state and even at the national level, but as far as the type of work that we do, I do most of the policy and advocacy, working on accessible housing, accessible public transit, accessible voting. So if any of those things are of interest to you, connect with us. But we also do cultural programming, which you'll, if you're viewing the screen, you'll see some examples of that. We have our member celebration, in one picture with some of our members. We have one of our disability pride celebrations there in the middle, with some of our, photojournalism, participants, and then another party here on the right. So today's agenda, I want to talk, first of all, go back to basics, and make sure that we're all thinking about disability and who is disabled, kind of at a foundational level, being on the same page, using the same language, things like that. And then building a layer on top of that, we'll talk about, again, still foundational, what is ableism, what is anti-ableism, and having a shared foundation with those things, we'll move into looking at a cycle of economic and disability inequity. We'll look at some policies to kind of guide our thought prospects there. And then we'll move into looking at models of disability and finally end with the 4 levels of oppression and change. Okay, so to start off, disability defined by us, for us. And why this slide is called that is because oftentimes, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the medical model, other people are deciding if we're disabled or not. It's not a self-identification. At Detroit Disability Power, we 1000% believe that this is something that you decide for yourself, knowing how your body and your mind work as the expert. So when we think about disability, we're talking about all types of disabilities, you know, your visible disabilities like mobility disabilities, sensory related disabilities. We're also talking about developmental, learning disabilities, mental health, neurodiversity, chronic illness, and chronic pain. Just to like take a pulse check in the room, do any of these not feel familiar to folks? No shocks here. Great. Okay, so moving to the next slide, we kind of have these circles nestled within one another to kind of show how power is not shared equally across all members of the disability community. But we still want to take a big tent approach and work across disability. And so this visual really just kind of shows where our culture tends to define disability with those very visible ones, and then moving to the outer rings are the ones that tend to be invisibilized, invalidated, not treated as real, you name it. And so again, we work cross disability because we recognize that even though we have very different experiences in our lives because of the bodies that we inhabit, we also know that we have the same needs. We all need shelter. We all need access to food and healthcare, ways to get around. And we experience the similar barriers because our society was not built for us to be able to do those things accessibly. And so a part of our organizing is to make sure that we are being radically inclusive and including all members of the disability community. Again, just reiterating that, you know, it could be an invisible or non-apparent disability, or it could be a visible one. We also recognize that disabilities happen all across the lifespan. Some people are born with them, have them their whole life. Some people kind of go in and out of being disabled, and things like that. It could be temporary or lifelong. So this is a very complex picture we're painting, which I know by the looks on your faces seems like is pretty familiar. So we're doing good. So more on disability identity. We at DDP really believe that the disability community has a political powerhouse. Disability is one of the identities in our country that has not historically been politicized. We don't typically think or haven't historically thought of disabled people as like a group of constituents that elected officials have to pay attention to in order to remain in power. And therefore we see laws and policies that don't work for us time and time again. And so we know that when we take a cross disability approach and we're bringing the whole community together because of that shared experience of ableism, that we can make a stronger people power move, right? And make our policy demands and have, you know, make them that much stronger. We also recognize that people with disabilities is already a large constituency, but it is one that is continually getting larger because of the events going on in our world, whether that is, you know, climate disaster, war and genocide, pandemic, epidemic, right? We're a growing group of people. So we have to band together, right? So that we can get our needs met. We also want to recognize that disability isn't the issue. No surprise here. It's the inaccessible world. And the last point we'll make here about being a political powerhouse is that laws that protect people with disabilities protect all of us. So we shouldn't have any pushback from most people. Thinking about disability more from the cultural perspective and as an identity group, again, we recognize that it is a natural part of life. We all get these body minds to live in during our time here on this great planet. And disability is a really valuable value add that has something to teach us about what it means to be in community with one another and in this physical realm. We know that disabled people exist in every other marginalized group. So very intersectional identity that also affords us a lot of space to learn from one another because our bodies and minds are already non-traditional. We have non-traditional access needs that require some intimacy. We have to get to know each other to really understand how to meet each other's needs well. And the more that we can do that, we also learn across other identities and demographics as well in that process because we are a group of people that comes from every race, class, gender, you name it. We know that disability is more than a medical or legal definition, which we'll dig into a little bit later. And the last one here is no one is more disabled than anyone else, which is a big thing that we emphasize because a lot of folks, even in the disability community, because our needs have not historically been met and we have kind of a trauma response to that, we don't want to gatekeep disability and accessibility. Everybody and mine deserves access. There we go. Okay, last one here is looking at some numbers. How many disabled people are there? The government numbers will tell you about or less around 20% of the population has a disability. So in Detroit, the official numbers are about 130,000 of 650 across the state. We have more than 2 million people with disabilities, 60 million countrywide. That's a huge number of people, right? So again, going back to that political identity and knowing what it means to build power across disabilities, if you're taking one group or one diagnosis or one type of disabilities, right, that number gets way smaller. You have way less people power, again, to get your needs met. And so the more that we can organize together and build community across disabilities, that's where we get to that 60 million super powerful number. But this is self-reported data, so we know that it's likely more, and it's also only a certain group of diagnoses that are tracked in data collection methodologies. And so we talk about our truer estimate, which is probably more like 35 or more % of folks across the country are disabled. We know that again, because of mass disabling events, this number is only going to get higher. And a lot of folks, because it's self-reported, may not report it for some reason, may not feel comfortable disclosing their disability status, or they may not have access to a diagnosis and may not want to include that data. So there's a lot of reasons why that number is small. There's a lot of reasons why people in power stand to gain from keeping it small. So that's why it's important to really understand like the breadth and the weight of this community because we are powerful. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up on we understand who's disabled, who we're thinking about in this big tent approach and why that's so important? Okay, we're tracking. Thank y'all. So next foundational piece is defining ableism, which at DDP we define as the discrimination of and social prejudice, against people with disabilities based on the belief that, quote, typical abilities are superior. Ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require, quote, fixing and defines disabled people as less valuable. It also shows up in many ways across systems and harms non-disabled people too. But thinking about the opposite of this, right? So if ableism is hinged on this belief that typical abilities are superior and all others are inferior, then flipping the script on that to talk about what is anti-ableism, that is the goal and practice of disability justice. And I want to talk about those two words really quickly, goal and praxis. So goal is like this, like down the road, that's what we're working towards. We don't have it yet, of disability justice. That's our vision that, you know, all people with disabilities are fully included, have what they need to participate in our world, and their needs are met. But the praxis piece is also important to point out here, because we're not just going to get ourselves there by operating under the ways that we've been operating. It requires us to practice anti-ableism today, tomorrow, and every day on the route to that vision of disability justice. So that's why we say it's the goal and the praxis. Another way to say that it is, it's the what and the how, the product and the process, if you will. And it demands a cultural revolution that redesigns the way we build, interact, and understand our changing and diverse bodies and minds. So the thing I want to point out about the second half of this definition is the demanding of a cultural revolution. Does that feel like woo to anyone? What are we talking about? Revolution. That's a big R word. I see some smiles, some eyes looking at the slide. What we mean by that is the way that our world was designed was inherently exclusive. The way that our physical places were built, the way that our processes and programs in government and institutions were built, even the ways that we work in our families and interact with each other. Many of those things were built on ableist assumptions and values. And so to actually implement anti-ableism and reach disability justice, we have to completely revamp or have a revolution of all of those systems. That's pretty radical, pretty exciting, but it is a lot of work. Okay, that was a long lead-in, but this is some of the nitty-gritty that I want to talk about today, which is the cycle of disability and economic inequity. This is like no secret, but it is important, I think, to slow down and like talk about it, pick it apart together, and really dig in on how this cycle is created, how it continues to move itself forward, ways that we can interrupt it and stop it altogether. And so this slide has kind of a circular wheel in the middle with disability and poverty. And there's two lists of bullet points on either side. One list is ways that, you know, disabled people are chronically under-resourced. The other side is looking at how being chronically under-resourced is actually more disabling. So we know that, you know, poverty causes disability and disability can cause poverty. So when you have that circle and those things are reinforcing one another, you create this, I don't know, inequity just feels like not a heavy enough word for how this shows up in people's lives, but let's dig in a little bit. So on the side with chronically under-resourced conditions for people with disabilities, the top one there is fixed income. So, you know, I'm going to kind of explain all of these. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some, most, maybe all of them. But to get us all on the same page, I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. And then I'll stop and see if there's any questions, or if you want to raise your hand throughout, we can. So the first one there is fixed income. So when folks are on disability or Social Security income, we know that that number doesn't change month to month, even though costs are rapidly rising, even though you may have a procedure that costs a lot, 1 month or 2 months of the year. There's a lot of reasons why it would be nice to have your income at least adjust with inflation and rise over time. But we know those programs have not been touched in many cases for decades and decades, and people are still being paid what they were in the 90s, which if that were true for all employed people, we'd be in a world of hurt. The second one there is sub-minimum wages. So in Michigan and in many states across the country, disabled people are one of a few groups of people that are still legally allowed to be paid less than minimum wage, down even in like the $1 to $2 an hour range. Obviously, when we're talking about equity, thinking about disabled people, tip workers are another one, and then obviously folks who are incarcerated. The next one here is barriers to education in the workforce. That's pretty dang broad, but from, you know, the applications to the accommodations processes to the physical workspaces, we know, and many of us have likely experienced, what those look like, to having barriers to opportunity, to be able to have, access to things that are gonna allow you to be upwardly mobile economically. The next one there is a lack of health insurance, lack of access to health insurance, even health care. The next one is disability tax, and I put that in quotes. There's lots of different ways. I think there was just a report put out called the disability squeeze, but essentially, this is just talking about how disabled people have more costs than non-disabled people generally. We have more co-pays, we have more healthcare needs we need to pay for. Maybe we have home medical equipment we need to apply for. We need caregiving support, and we can't get, you know, qualified to get paid direct care support in our homes. So we have to pay out of pocket. You name it. There's a sprawling list that you could take an entire probably degree on with this disability tax concept. Then we go to inaccessible government programs, services, and information. So I put this on here to kind of somewhat delineate or separate the ideas of the programs and how they're bad in some ways, like the fixed amount of income over time and it's not increasing with inflation. But to even back up one further, zoom out, even just the process of knowing that they exist, being able to navigate the processes to know, am I eligible to even apply, to find a person to maybe help you apply all the way through, you know, it takes years to get an answer for some benefits programs. And then connected to that still is asset and income limits. So even when we are given access to supportive resources, we're told that we can't have a certain amount of resources, which keeps us under-resourced. And then the last one here is connected to that disability tax with thinking about treatments and medications that insurance doesn't cover. Any thoughts, questions, or additions that people want to shout out and add to this, the ways that disabled people are chronically under-resourced? I mean, again, this list could go on forever, but for the sake of the slide, we'll keep it minimum. But any ideas folks want to share?
I think running through all of that is inaccessible transportation, because it's something we hear every day. And I could apply that to most of those bullet points up there. I think just, I guess, behind all of these, there are more underlying barriers that just compounded.
Yes, and I like the word compounded too, because it's just complex, and the more you dig into any of these one issues, you start running, it's like circular, right? You run back to transit on each and every one of them. A lot of times you're going back to housing on each and every one of them. Are you gonna say housing?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say housing.
Okay,
Yeah.
is there more that you want to say?
I'm just saying, yeah, no, I definitely went, you know, housing was definitely a buzz one because fixed income affects housing, if the person that in less restrictive environment, you can't take away people's rights, you know, or somebody's gonna be calling recipient rights, you know, so I think that's another thing, and then treatment and medications are what insurance may cover, because insurance may cover something to put some things in place for the person who's safe in their own housing, but it goes down to what Medicaid is willing to cover and what you can what you can medically justify.
Yes, yes. And you have to prove and then prove again and then prove again. Yes, I saw another couple of units.
I wanted to add also like administrative barriers, like just getting the paperwork done to be able to apply for services, using waiver funding if you have that. How do you do that? How do you find the personnel? Well, you may need to send out applications for that. And all of that is just more and more things that require so many different blockades that you have to then go over, and whether it's the individual itself, support personnel, it's always just a lot for some time, and something that may be that helpful.
Yes, 1,000%. It's hard to get the services, it's hard to keep them. They want you to do paperwork, burden of proof is just thank you for adding that. Yes.
I'll also say these issues are magnified depending on the zip code or where you live. Like, if you live in an under-resourced community, are there going to be more community-based supports? Or like for me, I've lived in Detroit all of my life. Most of my specialists, I have to go all the way out to Rochester to see a neurologist or my primary care physician that knows how to deal with someone with co-occurring disabilities. So just even depending like where you're born might impact your early intervention or access to care over the lifespan as well.
Yes, 100%. And just thinking about my own experiences as a disabled person and as a caregiver that lives in Detroit, and same story with all of the specialists being out in the suburbs, and thinking about, we have a car, but if we didn't, then you have to figure out DDOT to SMART and, the redlining of even the resources. Yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up.
And then in other neighborhoods that are nicer, people might not want those sort of resources that do help people with other needs. So they won't even pay for or sign up for transportation or sign up for housing that is like low income housing. I've been actually told that people are like, if we had low income housing in our neighborhood, we would move.
Yeah.
So it's that other shoe on the
The
other
NIMBYs,
thing, like if it's a nicer neighborhood, they might not even sign up to have those services put in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and to get really specific, one example of that DDP is working on right now, and that will be coming up for a vote in Wayne County next year. Maybe some of you already know what I'm gonna say, but there will be a transit village on the ballot. And that would force all of, if it got voted in, would have all of Wayne County be opted into public transportation. Currently, there are spots out in western Detroit and downriver, especially because communities do not want people from Detroit coming to their communities. So they opted out of having public transportation services. So we worked in Oakland County a few years back so that they have countywide transit now, and we're going to work on that in Wayne County next year, so that ideally in the next 5 or so years, we will have connectivity across all counties, at least southeastern Michigan. Thank you for bringing that out. Any other thoughts on the chronic under-resourcing? I know we can have a fruitful discussion on this all day. Okay. Moving on to the other side of the slide, and obviously these feed into each other, are the disabling conditions that come with being under-resourced. That includes things like adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. We know that trauma before the age of 18, before your body's fully formed, compounded is more likely to increase your likelihood of becoming disabled. A lack of access to preventative care, lack of access to care in the least restrictive environment. So can you get your care needs met in your community, where your family lives, near your neighbors and friends? Harmful environmental conditions, like air quality. I mean, Detroit has the #1 asthma rates in the country. Clean water, clean soil, all of those things affect our body's health. And the last one here is the benefits cliff. So that's just a term that we use lightly to explain what happens when you start to make just above the asset and income limits, and then all of a sudden your benefits are either lost or thrown into chaos, and you have this whole rigmarole of paperwork and readjustments to go through. So I know I sped through that one, but does anyone want to speak to or add to this list of what about being chronically under-resourced is then disabling, whether or not you're already disabled?
I think if you experience something as such as a adverse childhood experience, for instance, and say you have mental health, problems added on, you don't know how to advocate for yourself, and it's more of an emotional thing. So it becomes another barrier that you're working to get through, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, mental health, that's why we include that in the umbrella of disability, because we know the body and mind are incredibly connected and both affect one another, and they're valid on their own too. Any other additions or comments? Okay. So what does this cycle lead to? I mean, I'm not gonna paint a picture that you all haven't already seen necessarily, but I did want to talk about, maybe I added the slide after I sent it to you, but I'll talk about it briefly. We know that nationwide, there's a housing shortage. So, you know, that compounds all of this as well. I want to say the national numbers I pulled was like 26% of folks or so, low 20% across the country are disabled. But as far as accessible housing, I think the rough estimates are around 6% of housing is accessible to some degree. And when you're talking about wheelchair access, it's less than 1% of housing options. And so we're not making decisions about how we design our homes that work for us. Thinking about incarceration, 66% of people who are incarcerated self-identify as disabled. So we know that that chronic under-resourcing also leads to incarceration and institutionalization, which is in and of itself disabling condition. Thinking about transportation and unemployment actually is the other thing I wanted to talk about. I believe it's 1 in 3 disabled people are employed, where 3 in 4 non-disabled people are employed. So just kind of painting a picture of, you know, when all of these things are taken together, that is why disabled people end up at the bottom of every quality of life index. Whether you're looking at education, employment, economic opportunity, your healthcare across the board, because we're not designing, you know, systems and institutions that work for us. Okay, so now we're going to move into talking about models of disability. We'll talk about 3 today, and I'll start with the one on the far right, which is the medical model of disability, which looks at disability as something to be cured or fixed, and it has very, very narrow definitions of what is normal and healthy. Moving backwards across the screen to the cultural and social models, they both view disability through the lens of those that experience disability. And believe that it is not only natural, but valuable, and they both build on top of the medical model. All of them still exist and kind of coexist. Different systems, different policies and practices rely on different models differently, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I do just want to take a minute of maybe awkward, hopefully not, silence for some reflection to yourselves, just thinking about what is the value of lived experience in the work that you do or in the places that you are in, and who in those spaces holds the power to define and label in your life. Okay, I'm not going to ask y'all to share at this point, but hold on to those thoughts. So this slide is talking about under each of these models, who is the expert, what is the goal, and who or what needs to change in the situation to find a solution to the goal. So under the medical model, the doctors are the expert. The goal is to cure or fix, and the thing that needs to change is the person, the disabled individual is the thing that needs curing and fixing. There's a very linear path of this is what's wrong with you, this is what we need to do to change you based on the environments that you're in. Moving to the social model, we're looking at the expert as the individual with a disability. The goal is having that individual be included into the environments that they are going into, and the thing that needs to change is the institutions that they're a part of. Now, taking that even further, looking at the cultural model of disability, I want y'all to notice the shift here on the expert from the disabled individual to the disability community. And I want to do a little callback So talking about our Big Tent approach across disability solidarity earlier on in the presentation, because we know that one disabled individual does not host all of the knowledge on how to design an accessible system. That's how tokenization doesn't work, right? One disabled individual does not have all the answers. We collectively, in all of our uniqueness and weirdness and non-traditionalness, have the answers that we need together. And the goal is that revolution that I mentioned, to reimagine and restructure all of our institutions and our environments. And what needs to change to do that is our hearts and minds, to really believe that disability is a value add. And one quick way to kind of check yourself on this is, would I choose to keep disability as an option for bodies and minds, or would I choose to wish it away with a magic wand if I had the chance? That's the change in hearts and minds piece. Any questions, thoughts, things folks want to share before we go into the discussions? Okay. So we are going to do a quiet 2-minute timed reflection. If y'all have like a pen and paper, feel free to like take some notes, journal if you want to do that on your phone, or if you just want to kick it and think inside your mind, that's cool too. We're going to spend 2 minutes thinking about these questions by ourselves. And then I'll set a timer for you all to pair with someone at your table. If there's an odd number, y'all figure it out. It's okay. And share with your neighbors about your reflections, and then we'll come back and do a large group share. But what I want y'all to think about is choosing, it could be an economic disability related policy, that's what we're talking about today. But a policy or practice that you're familiar with, maybe it's something in your, work environments, or something that you've encountered in one of your institutions that you're a part of. But think about that policy or practice and ask yourself which models of disability inform that policy or practice and how. And last, I want you to think about what are the benefits and challenges, because it's both, of using various models to inform the policy design and implementation. Do these questions make sense to folks, or do we need clarifications before we start? I see one thumbs up. I see lots of thumbs up. Okay, thank you guys. All right, I will start a timer for 2 minutes right now.
Or, side of, like, my building thing.
There is a good idea.
Okay.
No, it's bad about it. Yeah. If you're one, it's got to be.
All right, y'all. Now we are going to move to spending about 5 minutes talking with your neighbors about what you reflected on, and let me know if it will be helpful to move back through either of the slides that we've looked at too. Y'all start talking.
And I would be first to admit that.
Yeah.
It's just like.
I added.
Oh, you did.
Okay.
Okay.
But then, you know, I probably believe there was a social model and that makes feel inside, right? It's something that we should fully have on is like sometimes paid communication around.
Oh.
But I think at the same time that I was overthinking about or I think there's like negativity seen for it, like, you know, a lot of people come in and say, so I'm here, that's why, you know, so we definitely.
That's never.
Yeah. And like,
Yeah.
and I don't swear that.
Don't-
I don't feel that way, so I don't want to feel that way.
Right.
And so I think that waste my time. A lot of that, and then, you know, the controversy too, like, if, you know, a child with a hearing loss, maybe they need a cohort lesson, but also kind of where you are, but the culture of, no, from like, the definition of abuse, and it's time, like, things like that, like, there was like a lot of fixed, right? Like, that also, you know, communication is kind of already like, kind of piece of it, and whatever and someone should report themselves.
In April.
Yeah, support
Yeah,
that.
for sure. I mean, and I can't say anything about that, but like even like, right? Like, I don't wanna do that. I think I'd be actually go fix that stuff, right? It's like 3 years that I there's a. Like, whatever. And I'm like, oh,
It got worse.
I have like that person fix it, and I'm not gonna like.
That has been here.
I said, yeah.
Not
Not that they're getting surgery, but I'm also going to use what's available in my classes and my contacts.
And there's nothing wrong with you having, you know.
Right,
Yeah, that's not for great eyesight. It's like that's kind of pushing your own goals and agenda sometimes onto you, and if that's even out, and I feel like.
I feel like every time I.
But like we were there.
Right.
That's not something I like.
Had that conversation,
Not gonna risk my eyesight to fix it.
yeah, everybody's that comes in and listen to the like and what they're.
Right, for sure.
And that,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that policies and understanding.
And I would love to.
I don't think I have jumped on. I think, although something passed yesterday, like, I start seeing
A lot of times.
and I need to get to it. But like it obviously affected with like school lunches, something taking away
Yeah,
from
that's
school
just like one
lunches,
step, yeah.
and that all fixed. So, and there was a mental health.
That's
hazard.
bad.
I was taking all that hard, it's such a good reason. For myself, and I'm trying, I think that's, I always talk about, that's the main is understanding about the legislative.
And like-
part.
You can stay in the area, isn't it?
I mean, I don't think it's gonna allow.
Like being in
Because of that,
Right.
trying to present that information, but you know, you think about what's on your own.
And I would know, but I keep on. I'm not gonna
What do you
hit the road.
You know,
Is he a-
we went about that, right, right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so this is part of my, like, individual. But I'm like, yeah, I want to learn more about how this, like, law-based, some of that part.
Right.
Because I understand the rest of it,
Really?
but I have no idea about that. Yeah, like just something, and it's funny, talking about a mentor, I was like, nope, I want to get into the laws and the policies. I just want to understand.
Right.
Like, I think that's a great goal.
Right, so much more about like, this is what's available to you, these are your rights.
For sure, because there is so much, again, the stigma surrounding health.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's like the more we can mainstream it it. And
More and more, you talk like about what even 10, 15 years ago, you just talk about that. I think the first thing was, lemonade.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that, like, in my mind, like, one of the first things that kind of started coming up, like.
Yeah.
Things
And people don't, right?
Right.
Robin Williams, one of the
Yeah.
happiest people, and that's, I think, one of his goals. Was getting to get medals that nobody left on the street, you know, so how do we like, how do we do this, and how do we make it so these kids who need residential, how do we make it so
But I
that
mean,
they
you
can
can
have
find
it?
that.
Even if they're in medication, how do we do
It's like,
this?
it's not something to shy away from.
Yeah,
Right.
but otherwise.
They're not really-
But if they don't.
More well-off people with private insurance.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, definitely like.
Nobody to have a crisis, and when they have that.
Like,
crisis-
you guys are-
Right, you know, yeah, not every parent can support their.
More about like.
So it's like, how do we manage this?
Some parents destigmatizing
It's like $5,000 a day.
Yeah. People are like, oh, should I get? I don't know if your child.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I was.
Me neither, like to have to,
Before that.
yeah, I don't even know how you.
So I'm like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're like private pay, private pay. I'm like,
And then there's.
our hospital is $2,000 a day.
Yeah.
So if you have
I just get it.
not take
I was like,
we're
but
a lot. We're like 50.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of units coming in, but
So it's always like,
Like-
I feel like you're kind of forced to make the choice.
Oh,
yeah.
guys are doing awesome.
Prioritize this
We're not.
for this, or am I wrong?
yeah,
My rent, a little bit of it.
right, exactly.
Forming policies, I feel like.
There's so much.
I haven't been lately, actually, yeah. No, yeah, exactly. We try to keep abreast of what you guys get sold too, and defense and stuff, and what was it about?
I like that. Yes, so would you turn?
Super cool. He's just. On the east side, they go south and then for us. So you guys got. We'll cross. That's all.
All right, so. And then 5 minutes.
I'm caffeinated.
My fault, my fault.
6 or 7, but we will start winding down our conversation. That was fast. Okay, we wound down. All right, so let's move into group share. So we've got the mic in the back. Which table would like to share first? Already.
So my partner Charlotte and I talked, she brought up a really good one, about like sick time and sick policies. And often employers not, acknowledging mental health as a reason or to complain. And I thought that was an excellent one, because it brought up your point of that disability can change over time, and then there's also it's liquid versus temporary. And while yes, you have work and productivity and expectations, again, honoring that regardless of the reason and not getting to disclose if you don't want to disclose ends up helping all. And so being more mindful of that moving forward.
Yeah, so I based it off of my personal experience at my first job out of college, where my boss was like, there is no such thing as a mental health day. If you call off because of mental health, you're getting written up. If you're sick on Sunday night and call in the night before, you're getting written up. If you're sick and it's Monday morning and you call in, you're getting written up. So, and I was like forced to come to work sick, essentially forced to come to work. And we were the only, and this kind of goes back to like labor relations, but I worked in the city of Detroit, and in my division, me and the rest of the people on the events and communication team were the only non-unionized employees. So we really had no outlets compared to working at Wayne State, where the UAW says, hey, I'm entitled to this much sick time as a salary employee. I tell my boss, I'm not feeling well. As long as it's no more than 3 days per the university policy for like extended leave of absence, it's fine. And I find I'm able to work better because of someone with a dynamic disability. I might just not have it in me today. I might just need a day or two to catch up. And so I feel like it helps my productivity. It helps me as an employee because I'm not worried about getting written up or being berated for something out of my control. And it benefits everyone, not just disabled.
Yes, 1,000%. And to that last point, and to make it real personal, and maybe overshare, but my husband lost his job because our childcare wasn't open on time, like 2 months ago. And that's just another example of how these access isn't just for disabled people, but when disabled people are centered, all access needs tend to be met. Thank you so much for sharing those examples. And I want to say I'm sorry, but like that's not gonna do it, right? Like we should connect and talk more about this if you're still working in that setting. If you want to. Others that want to share?
Okay.
One thing we talked about, and I'm kind of, I guess, approaching this from the lens of audiology, was the whole discussion of like cochlear implants in the deaf community. I feel like is a microcosm of this larger kind of battle sometimes between the medical model and the social community models. It's very interesting to look at just like that examples, particularly where this medical model was seen as an erasure of the deaf culture. And was like turned to genocide on the deaf culture. I think it's interesting to see both sides of the aisle there. And now, nowadays, I think there's a little bit less vitriol surrounding that conversation versus back in the 90s when it was a little bit of a newer conversation. But how much it comes down to the individual and what's best for them and their community and their families. And I think that kind of can apply to a lot of different, clashings between the medical and social community models.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. Also, kind of a historical way to see how the model has shifted in action in that field. And well, I shouldn't say we, because I'm not an audiologist, but I assume, and from what I've experienced in taking my dad and my best friend to their audiologist, there's a lot more nuance to those conversations around, do you want this? Is this a goal of yours to be able to hear, especially if you sign?
Okay.
I think something we discussed as a group is the economic cliff. And so if you have someone that has a disability and they would like to get a job and they're on that fixed income and they risk losing their job, but they get a job that is paying less than what they're getting on Social Security, and that is already capped out depending on what category you fall under. And then if you want to have a savings account, that is closely monitored as well. And you find limits and how can I save money for the future? I'm only thinking about I'm so focused on surviving in the present. How can I put away money for the future? But there's limits that come with that as well. And then if you do get a job, there's other things like I know they have this thing where it's called freedom to work. You have to pay a premium to work. You have to pay a premium to keep your Medicaid. And then they're very, as a matter of fact, if you don't do this, if you don't comply by the state, then you lose your benefits. So it's just something that definitely mentally wears you down because you have to choose between can I keep my Social Security or can I live my life and have a whole life and get out and work and be a person and contribute without losing my benefits because I do need them.
Yes, thank you. These are all wonderful examples. And one thing that's coming to mind as maybe a helpful framework and kind of parsing through the complexities of some of these situations is event diagram. Has anyone heard of those before? Okay, so it's set up like your traditional Venn diagram with two overlapping circles, and there's like the cross part in between. But the Venn diagram is specifically designed to hold two truths that are in tension with one another together in the same place. So a great example with like the cochlear implants and just like medical treatments in general, knowing that we don't want to wish disability away. We don't want to disappear disability. And also there's very real parts of disability that make it difficult to live our day-to-day lives. And it should be up to each individual and community to decide how those things are met and what options they have available to them without it being so prescriptive and forced upon people. All right, we have a few more minutes together. I do want to talk to y'all about this 4 levels of oppression and change. So ableism operates across all of these levels, but so does every other kind of oppression, and they're all working in cahoots with one another. So we've got our fight cut out for us. Being anti-ableist and anti-racist and anti-transphobic and all the things in each of these levels at all times. So that means at the personal level, we need to be interrogating and figuring out what are our beliefs and feelings and values about disability, whether or not we're someone with a disability. We can have internalized ableism, right? I know because I have it and I'm working through it always. But thinking about what do we believe about these things. On the interpersonal level, thinking about the way that we behave towards other people, maybe who have different disabilities than us, or if you're not disabled, who have a disability, the language that you use in talking about disability and accessibility, people's access needs, whether or not that's like burden language or placing the blame on people kind of language. There's a lot of things there, and the actions that you take in your relationships. And then where we've spent a lot of time today is at this institutional level, talking about policies, funds, and rules, because our economic system is heavily tied to institutions. We also have the cultural level and thinking about what do we believe is true? What do we believe is normal or abnormal? What do we believe is beautiful? And how can we integrate anti-ableist frameworks into all of these aspects in our lives simultaneously and across forms of oppression? So that is why we talk about these things as levels of oppression, but also as change. This was originally just an oppression framework. I'm like, but wait, we can make this actionable. We have work to do to make our world more free in all of these areas. And so I have a couple of questions for y'all. We only have 5 minutes together, so maybe let's spend 2 at your tables. Thinking about what can you or how can you and your institution combat ableism or be more anti-ableist? And this question gets me every time. What do you gain? What do your people gain in a world that accepts your body and mind the way it is, no questions asked? So let's spend 2 minutes there and we'll come back together to wrap.
It was a big one. I was like, here's 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, let
How
me
would you
think about
change
it.
the world? Well,
Not
That's a great question.
The word prescriptive. Oh, yeah. And I think that is like one of like, I don't want to say easy, it's not easy, but like one of like the most overarching ways to combat that ableism is to be prescriptive. She's like professional. For sure. Each person is different. I don't know why I'm very hard to talk.
Just bringing accommodations to, and we're trying to reduce barriers, yeah, and that just becomes a more effective way of going about it, and you know, think about it, like, you know.
You may not be using that right word terminology, but
like we are here. I don't remember, there's like a term for it, but it's like when you make an accommodation for one group of people that helps others, like how they like cut out like
universal design.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I work in that framework in instruction. Universal design for learners. Yeah. It's a term I say every day. Just said it.
And I feel like by not being prescriptive, it's like when they're universal design, like social universal design for that impacts like but also like racism. I mean, homophobia. Just question number 2. Anyone else? I mean, what better than to game?
You know, they is there a negative to that? You know? Accepting there's gonna be more acceptance and inclusivity. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking about it
Even if
today. I'm
it's like-
just than that. I'm like, oh, I'm putting myself in.
Living worlds that.
Everybody was like preschool kids.
All right, y'all.
Yeah, like what's the
It's even-
downside?
it's good.
Winding
Like that little
down.
picture of the.
Let's hear from a couple folks, what y'all discussed. We're still discussing. I love it. Sorry.
You know.
No, it's okay.
Like, yeah.
All right. Let's have a couple folks share out and then a couple more slides before we wrap.
Warmed up. So one thing we mentioned, you used the word, like prescriptive. I feel like kind of an overarching, way to combat ableism would be to be less prescriptive in our approaches as professionals. And again, we were talking about like universal design and how that's almost like a social universal design where, if you're not prescriptive in your approaches, you're not only going to be combating, ableism, but also things like racism and homophobia, xenophobia. Just making sure that you're taking each individual as they come instead of having just your prescribed view of what's wrong.
Yeah, I love using the term universal design because I think like applying that across different institutions and policies and things like that, even though it comes from kind of housing and built design, we can definitely apply it to the ways that we socialize with each other too. Thank you.
I think something we were starting to bring up was, maybe even in your personal values. If you work somewhere and their values don't, and you can't make any change with, like, you're hitting a wall and this is it, this is how you practice. This is what we believe in, this is what we're, supporting, and you notice that those things don't align with you, then, you know, you have the ability to find a place that aligns with you or create something that aligns with you in your practice and how you do your practice, because I think that makes, like if there are things that certain agencies and organizations are pushing, and you don't necessarily know that until you are there. You know, we're doing this for funding. It's not, we're doing this because we care about the public that we serve. We're doing this because we need the money, but we forget about that other piece that people, real lives are being affected when an agenda is being pushed.
Yes, thank you both. All right. So what I want to leave y'all with, there's one more.
Yeah, I just had a quick one. One thing in terms of combating ableism as a self-advocate is just coming from the Black community where disability is so stigmatized, is just talking about my experiences very openly and candid. Yes, there are difficult things, yes, there are challenging things, but disabled people can live full lives, and when you normalize seeing disabled people in the community, it starts to shift mindsets even on the smallest interpersonal levels.
Yes, we deserve to be seen. We deserve to be seen as normal. And the more we like push to make ourselves seen and heard and acknowledged and validated, that's the culture shift piece. And to your point about workplace culture, and this is part of why I want to talk to you, sometimes we just have to leave a space because it is disabling to us. It's not feeding our soul, if you will. And not that DDP has a service for this necessarily, but we have worked with our members before to try to like job hunt lightly together and talk about policies that show up in certain types of workplaces and things like that. So you can always reach out to us if that is something you're experiencing. I don't want any disabled person to have to work in an ableist work setting, but unfortunately, many, not most, all of us do. All right, so to leave y'all with the end goal, this is DDP's vision and mission, is full inclusion of all disabled people, regardless of all of our identities, sex, age, gender, race, income, etc. We want fully accessible societies, built and digital and social. And we need revolution to do that, to truly do that, and to truly transform and educate our communities, to unlearn what caused these barriers in the first place. And we need to do it in a way that is sustained, in a way that honors that the people who come after us will be inheriting the vision that we create today, just like we are living in the visions that were created by our grandparents and their parents. Okay. That was a lot. I'm still sifting through all of y'all's comments. I'll be thinking about them all day and wishing that I had time to talk to y'all more. But this is an invitation to continue the conversation, to stay in touch with us as an organization, get involved with some of our activities if you're in the area, or if you're not. We also have virtual options. But we have DetroitDisabilityPower.org is our website. You can find us on Meta and Blue Sky, I want to say, at Detroit Disability Power. And then if you want to just kind of get our emails and see what we're up to, take actions with some of our policy advocacy, join some of our cultural programming, like our danceability classes, things like that, you can find us there. And there's some lovely pictures of more of our members at our events and things. But thank y'all for listening and discussing and sharing so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to point out on the far right in the brown there, that is, you're gonna do it too. That's Jamie Jr. She is a former MyLent training and a current module lead for the self-advocacy module that you'll be part of in January.
Go, Jamie.
So we're everywhere, yes. So thank you, Kaci. And I forgot to mention this at the beginning. So this slide deck, all the presentations today will be, if they're not all on Canvas yet, but they will be. So you can download them and have them, okay?
Yeah, and thank you so much, Kaci. Just always such great information, and each year you come, I think I learned something, my brain grows a little bit. So thank you. It's not easy to do. So we're gonna take just a 5-minute stretch break. But before we do that, I just wanna, I meant to do this when we started back up. Just a huge thank you to the Soul Studio for the wonderful food and the wonderful service. I hope you can hear us in the back, like just a huge thank you. Yes, thank you, Rachel. Thank you. It's just such a pleasure to be here. So let's just do a 5-minute quick stretch break and then we'll come back.